I'm here with Todd Boehly, and we're going to cover so many topics. When I got to know Todd about 10 years ago, he was just starting Eldridge and had 2 companies, or 3 maybe, he was invested in. Now he has over 100. It's been explosive growth since he started. And as you know from the sizzle reels, Eldridge has been compared many times to Berkshire Hathaway for being early to buying an insurance company. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about sports media entertainment. We're going to talk about asset management, credit, real estate. Hopefully we'll get to all of it. So Todd, welcome.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
Good to be here.
So first, I just wanted to talk about, with all the different industries you cover, they seem really disparate. What is the thread that runs through all of it? Like, what is your investment approach?
Well, we started looking at the world thinking about what do people need and what do people want. And the kind of the lens of what do people need and what do people want has been allowed us to stay true to what we've been focused on as we've been building our portfolio of businesses. And obviously, insurance is one of the largest industries in the world. There's more 100-year-old insurance companies than any other industry in America. The business model is really robust. You've got very long-term liabilities, which allow for investment strategies that can take advantage of those long-term liabilities. And then you have all the sports and the media, and that's really what people want. And I think if you think about like what really cuts through today and all the noise, there's nothing like a live sports event to attract an audience. And I think that's just going to continue to grow.
So very, very early to buying an insurance company. There have been many followers after you. And you've been very, very early to credit investing. Talk a little bit about where you think credit and insurance are going to go, and asset management and insurance are going to go.
Well, I think the two go hand in hand. And I think the building a very diversified credit book and being a problem solver, capital solutions. And right now we're in a world where I think there's going to continue to be a premium on liquidity and liquidity solutions. And I think the stable funding source of the insurance companies really allow for the execution of all types of different credit strategies. So right now we're equipment leasing and financing. We're real estate credit, structured credit, and of course, private credit and broadly syndicated credit. And when the world turns, there's good opportunities for distressed.
Right.
So I think that the combination of those long-term, well-funded liabilities with the opportunity to move across different credit activities, allows for us not to be levered to a single asset class, because asset classes generally they move in a pack.
Yeah.
And within asset classes, industries move in a pack. So if you look through kind of defaults and how defaults work, generally, defaults are concentrated within an industry at any one point in time. So really, outperformance in credit is about understanding the collateral package that you have, and what the assets are worth. Because no matter how messy a credit situation gets, as long as the business or the real estate asset is worth more than the loan, it's going to work out.
Okay. You made news in December, pretty big news, that you launched a $74 billion asset manager. Talk about why you did that, where you see that business going.
Well, what we were able to do was we basically got teams that were focused specifically on one underlying asset class. So Stonebriar was our equipment leasing business, Panagram was our structured credit business, Maranon was our private credit business, and Kane was our real estate credit business. And by bringing them now all together under a new brand, we have the track records. And when they start and you're incubating them, you want the teams laser focused on their activity and getting their track record and no distractions. And then, of course, you get to a point where you've now got the track records, you've got the teams, so the mindset becomes, how do you scale?
Right.
And of course, having 4 brands, is a lot harder to scale than having 1 brand.
Yeah.
So by consolidating all of them into one platform and being able to provide all things credit and GP solutions, which really are in service to the roughly 5,000 private equity firms that are out there, we can then play, in all elements of credit, as well as kind of capital solutions or GP solutions that, we think are more creative.
So you did your own private roll-up. You rolled up your own businesses all in different aspects of credit to create this $74 billion asset manager. I mean, where do you want to take it?
Well, I think the number one thing that we're focused on is how to continue to outperform.
Yeah.
And I think the lens that you need to be able to look at the world, has to allow for a broad funnel.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think if you're very limited to how you can move in and out of things, then you're just going to become a derivative of that asset class.
Right.
And so the key is to be able to have lots of elements. And one of the things that we'll be working towards is how do we solve acquisition finance, recapitalization, and equipment leasing, and provide those solutions all to the same company at the same time. And I think you're seeing, things get more and more efficient. And as you get more thoughtful about how you can be more creative around how to provide financing, and not just look to check boxes, that's where we think that you can generate alpha.
Okay. And we will get to sports, media, entertainment in a second. I know everyone wants to hear about that always. But before we leave the asset manager and solving complex problems, you talked to me a little bit about a couple of the deals that you've done now that would be within the asset manager. Something with Morton Salt, it was really interesting. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I think, again, you're always thinking about how do you solve problems. So, there was a company called Kisner. Kisner had made $200 million of EBITDA. Morton Salt was owned by a German phosphate company, and Morton Salt was going to be sold in order to pay off maturing debt. There was a whole group of buyers. Kisner was a strategic, so their view was, we have $200 million of EBITDA, Morton has $200 million of EBITDA, there's $200 million of synergies, we should be the best bid.
Yeah.
But the German company was really worried about the Department of Justice and getting Kisner through the acquisition of Morton, and they had to pay off debt.
Because of the monopolistic situation.
Well, I wouldn't call it monopolistic,
Yeah.
but they were worried about,
the bad word, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not going to be up here saying that.
Sorry, after the fact.
So we basically went to the German company and said, we'll provide you a line of credit, and if you need to draw on it, you can draw on it to pay off your debt, but let Kisner have the time to go through the
Right.
Department of Justice process. And then, of course, that acquisition was so valuable to Kisner, given the $200 million of synergies, we basically said to Kisner, once this gets done, our loan to the German company is going to roll into your pro forma capital structure in the form of a preferred. And they offered us compelling terms for solving the problem, because most private equity firms have a very specific mandate,
Right.
and therefore they weren't able to actually provide the loan to solve the problem. So we provided the loan, rolled into the capital structure, had 3 years of non-call, and got penny warrants for roughly 5% of the company. So we created a really nice piece of paper that was probably 6 times deep on a business that's probably worth 11 times, with the non-call 3. So we knew we were going to get at least 1.5 times our money plus whatever the warrants were worth. But by figuring out how do you play in that solutions business, we think that there's going to continue to be more opportunities, because right now the world's continuing to look for solutions.
So diving into entertainment and sports for a minute, talk about how your credit lens, the way you invest, actually applies to something like the Golden Globes, which I'd love to dig into. The New York Times just called the recent January 5th Golden Globes a complete turnaround, a complete triumph. I mean, that was a turnaround situation, but why would a credit investor get into the Golden Globes?
Well, I mean, again, this is where we're looking at intellectual property.
Yeah.
And the value of intellectual property. And our theory all along with the Globes is that, okay, they've been through a lot, and having watched what they had done to themselves, right, it was really an interesting case study, because if you actually wear their perspective as you think about it, the internet really hurt journalism. The opportunity to provide access, which is what the Hollywood Foreign Press had at one point in time, the value of that deteriorated. And so this group got very insular because their ability to make money as journalists using that seat was getting threatened, because all of a sudden that access was less valuable because celebrities were everywhere and you were able to get information everywhere, and the internet changed all that. So they had a classic foot fault, and we were able to come in. I became interim CEO of the company and kind of turned it around. And the number one thing that I did was I broadened the voting base. So we went from just the HFPA members voting to we created a global voting panel of entertainment experts, and then we're able to reboot it, but in the end, it's all about what's the intellectual property worth, right? And that's going to be a derivative of, okay, how big of an audience do the Golden Globes command? And after a couple rocky years, for the first time in a long time, 3 or 4 years, because it went from COVID to the boycott, we're now playing offense with that intellectual property. And I think one of the things that the New York Times was, who doesn't really throw compliments around generally,
no, they don't,
was saying that our reboot is the reason now why Demi Moore is talked about as being an Oscar contender. So all the big Oscar strategists are going to be looking at the Golden Globes. Now we have a 3-year deal with Nikki Glaser, and we have a 5-year deal with CBS. So everything is kind of stable. So instead of playing defense, we're now back on offense.
That's really an amazing story. Let's get to sports, which everyone wants to hear about. Lakers, Dodgers, Chelsea, football. You are so early in investing in sports. You were also early in predicting that institutional investors would get into sport. Talk to us about your philosophy of sports as an asset class.
So the first one was the Dodgers. And,
by the way, I brought
after
my Dodgers hat.
After
Dodgers!
We're now the evil empire. I told Andrew Friedman that he needs security everywhere he goes.
I won't keep this on for long. I know it's distracting.
But the first thing we saw about the Dodgers was obviously, when you look at what the Dodgers represent, right? 5 million homes in LA.
Yeah.
And you start to think about what are those 5 million homes worth. And so we did a lot of math on that. And when we paid $2.1 billion for the Dodgers, we got lambasted
People thought
for
you were nuts.
overpaying. And and then a year later we sold the media rights for 25 years for $8.9 billion. Right? So the present value of those media rights exceeded what we paid for the team. And with it, we got a stadium, we got 200 acres of land. And so, I think just looking at it differently, right? Because those media rights, I just saw them as a media company is going to give birth to an investment grade bond, right? So we had CBS, Time Warner Cable, and Fox at the time, all competing for those media rights. Because what did media companies do? They got sports, and Fox would go to all the MVPDs and say, all right, if you want the Dodgers, you're taking FX1 and FX2 and FX3. And so they would bundle their distribution of all their other products on the back of the sports deals. So, I think we became pretty clear as to, okay, we think it's definitely worth, $7 billion. And when we ended up getting closer to $9 billion, that was the upside of having, a proper auction.
Pretty big upside. And talk to us about Chelsea. Chelsea's doing better?
Chelsea's doing better. I mean, I think if you look at big brands in the world, right, Chelsea's one of the biggest brands in the world. You're in West London. You've got a fan base that is global. You've got a team that's global. And I think we're in the early days. We've got the Club World Cup coming. So in the US, the top FIFA is sponsoring, which DAZN just took down the media rights for and paid something like $1 billion for the media rights for the debut Club World Cup. So as they continue to think through how to optimize the calendar and have more and more competitions, we think that intellectual property is going to continue to go up in value.
So, I mean, the value of these assets are just so huge. I think it's one of the reasons why the NFL has allowed institutional investing, right? Because the numbers are just too big. Tell us, I mean, sports seems to be on every investor's mind right now. What's your perspective on where that will go, and what are the watch-outs?
Well, listen, I mean, if you think, the question is, a simple question I always ask people when they start wringing their hands around, what's the value and where they're going to go, right? Would you rather own the NFL or would you rather own Netflix, right? So Netflix right now is trading for $400 billion roughly, and if you looked at the NFL and said every team was worth $5 billion, which is probably low, so let's say every team is worth $6 billion, you're still sub $200 billion, right? So here you have intellectual property that I think something like 95 of the top 100 rated shows last year on broadcast TV were NFL games. And you had the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, you had the Oscars, the Grammys, you'll have the Globes, you'll have, there's one other I can't remember, but anyway, there's the college football, right? So you had those 5, and then you had 95 NFL shows. So what else is out there that will not allow time shifting, right? And it delivers an audience, right? And so, and broadcast is really good at delivering audience at scale and not buffering. Yeah. So I just think that there's a lot more room to run. And I think the Premier League, if you think about like the Premier League media feeds, there's only 2 countries that don't pay for it in the world, Russia and North Korea. Everywhere else pays a license fee to get access to the content. And I'm sure Russia and North Korea are getting access to the content, they're just not paying for it.
Right. Do you see a future where retail investors can invest in sports teams?
I think the evolution of it, is going to allow for that, right, as kind of each stage gets broken down. So, I would think that there's going to be ways to get exposure to teams and retail products. Obviously, it's already started in the institutional market, right, with Major League Baseball and basketball and now the NFL, hockey as well. Premier League's already been there. So I think you're going to continue to see the fractionalization, of the asset class that will allow for the consumption of the asset class in smaller and smaller units.
Okay. Let's talk about real estate for a minute. You have a huge real estate investment portfolio. Tell everyone about that and talk about a couple of the very interesting projects you've got going. The one in Beverly Hills, a lot of people here go to the Milken Conference. That is tearing up the Milken Conference, but will be really incredible. Tell us about your real estate.
So we're partners in Aman. And the Aman Group at the holding company, and big believers in Aman as the benchmark of luxury. And so if you look at what Aman here in South Beach, is trading for, it's over $7,000 a foot.
Wow.
New York is $10,000 a foot now on the secondary market, and the New York Aman has outperformed all expectations. And we believe that the project in Beverly Hills, which is basically 1.4 million square feet. It's a 17.5 acre plot. It took me 15 years to put together and get the entitlements. We're going to be, the only towers in Beverly Hills, 2 residential towers. One will be 28 stories. One will be 32 stories. And, every unit in those residences will have 35% more square footage than is quoted, because everything will have outside terraces and plunge pools. And so when people look at, it's $7,000 a foot, when they look at the comp set, and of course, you don't need to pay all that up front. So when you think about it's actually $7,000 a foot in 2027, you think about it's less than that, but then you add the square footage of the terraces, and I think it's going to be a product like no other. And we're platforming over Merv Griffin Way, which separates LA Country Club and the Beverly Hilton. So there'll be one 17.5 acre with 4.5 acres of gardens. We're going to have 200,000 square feet of retail. We're getting all the big brands are interested. We've already signed really good LOIs. But if you're interested in security, amenities, serenity, and privacy, right, there's going to be no better place. You'll just drive in and you'll go right up from where you park and you'll be in your apartment. And so the demand has been very robust, and we haven't even gone internationally with it yet because there's so many people in LA that have been thinking about, okay, I don't want to pay for my yard, I don't want to pay for my service providers, I don't want to think about security. So that's been a big good project for us, and I think we're pretty pleased with the partnership that we have with Amman and the development there. And then here in Miami, we just built 830 Brickell, which is the newest office tower, and I think we underwrote that at $60 a foot, and we're going to end up, I think we just leased up the top floor. Of course, it's the top floor, but that was $200 a foot. So when we look at what we are able to achieve, in that building's been phenomenal. We built the Edgewater and the Masonian Edgewater. We're building the Una Tower, which is the last tower that you go over, that you'll see before you go over to Key Biscayne. And so Florida's been, a great place for us as well as we've been developing real estate opportunities.
That's great. I want to make sure I cover for all the investors in the audience again, the credit markets going forward. Everyone seems to be in credit. I mean, if you look at the agenda of any conference like this, it's like credit, 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 credit. Do you have any concerns about the future? And there are some jitters in the market. The media is starting to sort of poke holes in some of the.
Listen, my view is that secured lending is a business that you can be in and day out.
Yeah.
And what happens is as the market gets more aggressive, right, kind of pricing starts to fall, and then documentation starts to get worse, and then there's a reset, and pricing goes out. But even when kind of markets are tight, right, there's still a business, and as long as you're top of the capital structure and your documents are good enough so that they can't gut assets out of your collateral package and kind of run away with them, so to speak, even if you don't have covenants, if you have protections, maybe you can't force your way back to the table immediately, but as long as the documents allow for the fact that you're protected, I believe that secured lending, whether it's equipment finance, real estate credit, private credit, senior secured private credit, I think those are businesses that you can be in day out. And returns will ebb and flow, but within a range.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I think high yield bond investing is a business that you should be into out of every 5 years, roughly. Okay. Right? So when high yield bonds are treasuries plus 300, move along. When investment grade bonds are, 90 basis points over, what are you doing? Right? So when you look at 10 years from like 2014 to the end of 2024, and go to Bloomberg and just pull it up and say, okay, what was the cumulative return on investment grade credit from the Bloomberg index, the US Treasury cumulative return, double B loan index, single B loan index, and then JP Morgan triple B CLO index, right? The cumulative returns from 2014 to the end of 2024, roughly 8% cumulative for treasuries, 20% cumulative for investment grade, 55 for the double B loan index, 60 for single B loan index, and the JP Morgan triple B CLO index, 88%. Right? So, I think that to me, understanding where the return is, and it's fascinating, right? If Silicon Valley Bank and Republic Bank own AAA CLOs instead of long-dated treasuries in a 2% 10-year environment, which, like, buying long-dated treasuries in a 2% 10-year environment, I don't know what you're thinking,
Yeah.
right? So, right, but if they had bought AAA CLOs or BBB CLOs, they'd still be here with us today.
Yeah.
Right? So I think when you really start to unpack where returns are, I think that's what we're laser focused on. And, I think that the credit markets are going to continue to grow, right? Because, if you think about what the value of the world is, right? You're able to lend 70% against the value of the world, whether that's in senior secured or mezzanine or high yield. So it's by far the 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah.
Right? And then when you start to think about the total value of real estate, the total value of corporates, and obviously take kind of the big tech companies out because they're not going to be borrowing money at these rates. But you look at kind of mid-market and larger market kind of opportunities, it makes sense why the credit markets are continuing to grow.
So before we finish, I want to make sure I ask you, you have boys in college looking at their whole future. You've had such an unbelievable, it's not over, but it's such a dynamic, successful career. What advice do you give them as they're looking at their futures?
So, the number one thing I tell them is just be nice. Willie Nelson's wife told me once, she said, I have 3 rules.
Okay.
Don't raise an asshole,
I know your 3
don't raise an asshole, and don't raise an asshole.
I love that.
Right? So I think that's the first thing that, just no reason.
What was Willie Nelson's wife tell you?
Annie Nelson said, don't raise assholes.
Oh, she
yeah,
said
that was her line.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and so, I think that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is be adventurous, right? The worst thing that can happen is you fail.
Yeah.
Right? And if you fall down, you get back up.
Yeah.
And it's no big deal, right? So, be willing to fail, especially when the stakes aren't so great.
Yeah.
Right? And then do what you say you do. Do exactly what you said you do. And by the way, if you can't do it, just say, I can't do it. Quick no's.
Right.
There's nothing more satisfying than a quick no.
I love that. All right. And with our last minute left, I always like to ask someone like you, I call this the check this out question. Like, what are you obsessed with? What should everyone in the audience check out? A show, an app, a book? What are you obsessed with right now?
Well, I'm super excited about the opportunity that America has and spending a lot of time, in Europe and trying to figure out like how does America, if you think about the evolution of countries, right? Why is Europe not growing? Right? And how do we not become Europe? So, I think the reality is, right now we're going through an interesting period, and I think, buckle up. And, one of the things I learned from people who are very close to Trump, is they told me, don't take him literally, but take him seriously. And I think if you take him literally, you end up but if you take him seriously, you see. Right, when I was playing football, one of my first coaches said, right, always watch a guy's hips, never watch his eyes, right? Because if you watch his eyes, he's going to deke you.
Right.
And if you watch his hips, he can't go anywhere without his hips. So I think that the reality of what we're seeing right now is a giant reboot.
Yeah.
And, I think it's pretty exciting for the capital markets.
Yeah,
Pretty exciting for, our government. I think Scott Bessent, who I've had the chance to spend some time with, I think he's really thinking creatively about how to, monetize assets.
Yeah.
Right? And how interesting is it that the TikTok deal that everyone's talking about right now, Trump wants warrants. Right? So Trump wants warrants in the TikTok deal. Right? And 80% of that is going to pay down debt, and 20% of it's going to go to our new sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah.
And those mindset, we've never had that mindset.
It's interesting.
Right? And I think that's going to drive rates down as people start to see that we're going to be really creative about how to repay debt. And I think that's going to be really good for our capital markets. And our innovation is a derivative of our capital markets. We have the deepest, best capital markets in the world where anyone with a good idea has a chance. And
I
that
love
to
it.
me is great.
God bless America. We're out of time. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.